Welcome to another episode of Rich Dad StockCast, the podcast for people that are serious about improving their financial education. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're tackling one of the biggest threats to your financial future, one that's quietly stealing your wealth every single day: inflation. Now, before we dive in, I want to make sure that you have access to something special. If you want free tools and resources to help you invest smarter and protect your money from inflation, head over to StockCastBonus.com right now. That's where you'll find exclusive content to help you stay ahead of the game. Now, most people don't realize this, but inflation is eroding their purchasing power every year. Your savings are shrinking, your paycheck doesn't go as far, and traditional financial advice won't save you. But today, we're going to fix that. Joining me today is Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner. Andy is one of the smartest investors I know. He specializes in helping people build wealth. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Del, thanks for that topic. I'm excited to dive into that. It's something I actually think about a lot, and I think people might leave this podcast thinking about things a different way. And you mentioned StockCast Bonus. That really is a perfect way to introduce yourself on how to beat inflation. So I hope people start with those free resources, because when you learn how to arrange your own financial statement and how to be agile with it, everything can be good news. So we'll actually dive in and talk about that. But great topic. I'm excited to discuss it.
Very good. Well, let's start with the basics. You know, inflation is one of the biggest financial threats, yet most people don't even realize it's happening, or maybe they're starting to realize it's happening. Why is inflation such a silent wealth killer?
Well, I mean, if you go to a basic economics class like we took in college, Econ 101, we do a pricing based on supply and demand, right? And so if you make money plentiful, if money is plentiful, that creates demand. For example, and it doesn't even need to be your money, it just needs to be available. What if we took mortgages and outlawed them, said you can only pay cash for a house? It's against the law to go into debt. Well, then the access to money would just plummet, and housing prices would the whole market would collapse. When you started pushing student loans and gave people access to money for student loans, tuition began to skyrocket, right? Because now they can finance that education without having to work their way through school. Money became plentiful, or access to it became plentiful, and boom, up go the prices. So if the Federal Reserve, through any of the levers they can pull, if they increase the money supply and money is plentiful, either by writing a COVID check to everybody and giving them cash, or dropping interest rates and giving people access to cash. Either way, buying power increases demand. If people have the ability to buy things, it increases demand, and up go prices. You're also having to pay more dollars because the money is worth less, and so it is a drag on savings. And if you go back to 1971, where they took the dollar off the gold standard, where it was no longer backed by, something you had to dig out of the ground, something that put a constraint on how fast you could dig it out and refine it and get it to back a dollar. Once the dollar just became debt, an obligation, full faith and credit of the United States, obviously we're going to have inflation massively after 1971. So the reason it's a silent killer, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. The reason it's a silent killer is if you put $100 in the bank, it's always going to show $100. You're not going to have 99 or 98 or 97. It's always going to be 100 if you put it in the bank. But you can't fill your tank with gas. You can't, go to dinner anymore, because that money is worth less than it used to be. So while the dollar amount is the same, what you can do with it is drastically reduced. And there's a lot of different things we could talk about, inflation, asset prices too.
Well, the government says inflation is 2 to 3%. That's what they say, but experts believe that the real number is much higher. What's your take on that?
Well, this is important because the government wants 2 to 3%. They want 2. Is the Federal Reserve says we like to have a little bit of inflation. We like it at 2. And they haven't been able to get down to that number yet. It's been as high as 9 and 10. the reason there's a debate over it is there's several indexes that you can use. Consumer price index is one, but it doesn't count certain things, and you can do producer price index, consumer price index. There's 3 or 4 metrics that they can use, and so they argue it's like unemployment rate. What do you count? Do you count? How do you come up with that index? But what you really need to just understand, I think, is just go to the grocery store and try to get out of the grocery store for under $100. You can't do it. Fill up your car with gas. It's tough to do. So you can feel it. You don't need a consumer price index to go to the grocery store and have people feel that crunch.
Yeah, just seeing the price of eggs, it makes me want to bang my head against the wall right now. But
yeah, my wife loves eggs.
Right, good source of protein there. Well, now thinking about inflation and just savings, many people still believe, many people outside of this podcast believe you should save your way to wealth. Why is that a dangerous myth?
Well, Benjamin Franklin said a penny saved is a penny earned. There's a lot of moral undertones of it's just good habits of discipline and self-control and restraint. All that's really important. Save for a rainy day is important, right? And so I understand frugality and I understand saving for rainy day, but saving for rainy day is different than investing in cash. Certainly, everyone should have a access to cash for some type of emergency, or you need cash to live. Your cash pays your bills, and you ought to have enough to see yourself through a tough time, I suppose. But as an investment, there's probably not many investments that are worse than a currency, a dollar or a euro, or any printed fiat currency. Because you're investing in something that can just be invented out of nothing. And so the idea that you could outpace inflation by saving, just think about that for a moment. If you are going to go 2% a year compounded, because it is a percent compounded over 30 years, that savings is going to be worth less, close to worthless. And I just don't see the wisdom at all in the battle cry by some people, save money, save money. I understand that if you spend it on doodads, you're going to be more poor. But I don't think saving is the answer. I think investing at a rate that is higher than inflation is really a key. And there's some things you can do to actually let benefit, maybe when we get back from break, we can talk about a little bit. But we can delve into, you mentioned StockCastBonus.com. If you understand the 6 numbers on the first 2 parts of a financial statement, a financial statement has 3 parts. It has, the income statement, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flow. And if you take the first 2/3 of that, your income statement, particularly your balance sheet, if you understand the 6 numbers related to those documents, you can position yourself to benefit from inflation or deflation, to where it's less about what happens in the economy, whether you inflate or deflate, and more about how you've positioned yourself. So there's a huge amount of control in learning those 6 numbers. And that's why we always encourage people to go check that out, start learning how to use those 6 numbers. It's a huge deal. That the idea that income and expenses are good and bad, or the assets and liabilities are good and bad, it isn't the way I think anymore. I used to think income good, expenses bad, asset good, liability bad. It really doesn't. It really doesn't work that way. From a balance sheet standpoint, if you buy an asset like a dollar, and that dollar goes down in value, that's bad. That's a top. When we had problems in the subprime meltdown, the Fed had this program called the toxic or troubled. They changed it from toxic to troubled. The toxic asset protection program, where banks were getting killed by their asset column. They were getting crushed by assets that were bad assets. And there is good debt and bad debt both. There are good assets and toxic assets both. So it isn't like asset good, liability bad. You can have fabulous liabilities and you can have horrible assets. And so learning those 6 numbers is key, and learning the direction. So, when we come back from break, I'll tell you a story. I think I'll tell you about the best speech I ever heard Robert Kiyosaki give. It changed the way I thought ever since. I think it's the best speech he's ever given. It had to do with inflation, but it's a longer story than we have before break time. So maybe we'll tease that and do it after the break.
There we go. So let's do this, Andy. We've just broken down how inflation is silently robbing you, but let's talk about solutions when we get back. Let's hear that story when we get back. And Andy's going to reveal some more ways how smart investors are fighting back against inflation. Don't forget, if you want the free tools and resources to help you invest smarter and stay ahead of inflation, head over to StockCastBonus.com right now. We've got some incredible resources waiting for you. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're exposing how inflation is quietly robbing you, and more importantly, how you can fight back. Now, before we dive in, a quick reminder, if you haven't yet, go to StockCastBonus.com for exclusive free tools that will help you invest smarter in any market. Now, Andy, you teased us about a story about Robert Kiyosaki. Just the floor is yours. I'm dying to hear this.
Okay. It was interesting. There's these wonderful guys, they're called the real estate guys. And it's Robert Helms and Russ Gray, and every year they have a cruise where you can go, and they call it the Summit at Sea. And one year they had asked, I was there, Robert was there, and G. Edward Griffin was there. And G. Edward Griffin, for those who don't know, he wrote a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's the creation of the Fed, off the coast of Georgia in the Atlantic, and it's where the Fed, it's got intrigue and behind the curtain type of stuff. And I love Ed Griffin. He reminds me of my grandpa a little bit, kind of a gold bug. And Ed gave a speech called "Abolish the Fed," and he talked about the evils of printing money and kind of what we've been talking about, the inflation that it causes, and the robbing of people's savings. People put $1 in there and then they print more of them. And so now what you've saved is abundant. You really haven't saved anything special. You save more of it and they just print more of what you have already. And so he just says, abolish the Fed. We should go back to gold. And the next day, Robert, best speech I've ever heard him give. I mean, it was dynamic. It was like watching a movie. It was like a cartoon. He just got in the zone. He talked about when he was in Vietnam, and he stole a helicopter or something, and he was in Vietnam, and they knew the price of gold. He found this woman in a village that grass hut type place, and she knew that. I mean, you knew the price of gold everywhere. But anyway, he said, don't abolish the Fed, be the Fed. And this is financial jujitsu. This is financial judo, where you're taking someone's energy and just going with it and defeating your opponent by using their own momentum against them. And he said, really, and it changed really how I mean, I knew this before, but it just hit me so strongly that if you have a balance sheet, and you have an asset that goes up, your net worth goes up. But if you have a liability that goes down, your net worth goes up. Think about that for a minute. Asset minus liability is net worth. And if you have a liability that goes down in value, your wealth increases. So that gives you 2 ways to increase your wealth, your net worth. And if saving money in an inflationary environment is bad, then borrowing money in an inflationary environment is good. And I've always known that real estate investors, I've been at real estate conferences and investing conferences where people in real estate don't even know what they're doing. They think they're buying real estate, but they're really shorting the dollar. They're not really buying real estate because they don't have any money to buy it. The bank's buying the real estate, and they're borrowing the money to do it. So, it's really not their money that they're getting the real estate with. And so they're in a short position. They're in a debt position. And I got to tell you that I'm not a real estate specialist, so I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think anyone can learn this. I mean, you don't have to be, have 8,000 doors underneath you to get this. I mean, you can have less real estate like I have and still understand it. Is that if you borrow money to buy real estate and you're in that short position, think about this for a minute. I don't know where Apple's going to go tomorrow. I don't know where, Nvidia is going to go tomorrow. I don't know where the S&P will go tomorrow. In fact, I don't even know where it will be in 5 years. But I will tell you this, the dollar will lose value over 30 years, for sure. I mean, of all the bets I could place and all the crystal balls that I could look into, the Fed is trying to take down the dollar at 2% a year, compounded over 30 years. That would be their ideal scenario, and they're going to work towards that. And if they have less than 2% inflation, they're going to adjust monetary policy to get it up to 2%. If it falls to 1%, they're going to print money to get it up to 2%. And so if you take that reality of that policy, and if they go faster than that, even better, then you're borrowing money when it's worth a lot. You're trading it for a house. You're getting that money back via rent, and you're returning it to the bank. So there's 4 steps: borrow, exchange back, and return. Borrow the money, exchange for a house, exchange back money for rent, buy rent, and then you make a house payment. So borrow, trade back, return. Those are the 4 steps in order of a short position. And so the best thing that you could have happen is if you have a lot of debt and the value of the dollar goes down, the value of that debt goes down. And yet the value of the house goes up and the rent you'll charge goes up. So you have this fixed payment. And I've watched this happen in my own life over and over again. I look at I have a smaller real estate portfolio than some because I'm more of a stock guy, but I wish I had more real estate because I've watched myself borrow money and that number doesn't change. It sits on that balance sheet, and so it's a silent wealth gainer. You mentioned, why is inflation a silent wealth killer? Well, if you have $100 on your asset column, it's worth less if the dollar goes down. Well, if you have $100 on your liability column, you owe less because it's worth less. And so the value of that house doesn't diminish. It's still, 3,400 square feet or whatever it is. It still has 5 bedrooms or whatever it has. And so rent goes up because the dollar loses value. The price of the home goes up because the dollar loses value, but the liability, that number stays the same, and it's worth less because those dollars are easy to get. They're easy to get through rent. They're easier to get through rent than before because they got to pay more for them. So I think, people talk about gold, and I like gold, but it doesn't cash flow. It's a great insurance policy against the falling dollar. But I'll tell you, the best investment in the whole world is the opposite of what Dave Ramsey says. Is he says, stay out of debt. I'm like, you out of your freaking mind? It is a sure bet to have the dollar go down in value. Sure thing. As sure as anything I know. They won't do a 1929 again. From Greenspan on, they criticized they say the Fed could have stopped the Depression by printing money. They could have stopped and so that's their view now. So Robert's great talk was, don't fight the Fed, be the Fed. Go with it. Borrow the money, trade it for an asset, and let them print themselves into oblivion, because all it does is reduce the obligation that you truly have in your liability column. That's profound. That's why go get that Power 6 special we have at StockCastBonus.com, and you'll start to see how those numbers work. and how to manipulate your positioning. It isn't about just buying the assets. It's about the utility of the liability column. That's another reason I hate 401ks, is the 401k doesn't use the liability column to your advantage. There's no utility there. And that column exists for a reason. It's to be used. Is it like fire? Yeah, it could burn you, but it can also heat your home and light your way and keep you warm and cook your food and protect you against predators. Fire is not a bad thing. So when someone like Ramsey says, stay out of debt, that just is a huge sign that they don't understand investing at all. Anyone can wag their finger at you saying, no, don't you spend and you should save. That's not creative. That's disciplinarian. It's parental. But it certainly isn't a way to create wealth. Saving wealth and creating wealth are not the same. Investors create wealth, but you don't save your way to wealth. You invest your way to wealth. And to me, that's like way obvious, but that's just my opinion.
Well, that brings up a good point. There's a lot of people that save their way to wealth. I'm going to put that in air quotes. They focus on their net worth, but that doesn't really help when prices are skyrocketing. Why is cash flow the key to surviving inflation?
Yeah, that's the other nice thing about, you could, and by the way, it isn't like stocks can't do this either, because you can use debt many ways, and more importantly, leverage is just as important. And let's say I have I benefit from inflation. If I own ExxonMobil and I see gas prices go higher, I'm making more money as an owner, and my dividend's going to go up. And that dividend is so consistent. People worry about stock prices up and down all over the place. Let me tell you, nothing has been more consistent over the past 35 years than ExxonMobil dividend. It's gone up every year. It's never had a down year. It's gone up every year for 35 years in a row, and I expect that, and that is a function of inflation. It's the same thing. And so cash flow is very important, because cash flow funds your debt. And if you have cash flow to pay that, and someone else is the best debt in the world is debt that someone else pays off. And that won't work with gold, and that won't work with Bitcoin, but it will work with real estate, and it'll work with other assets that you borrow money that produce cash flow, because the cash flow services the debt. And so you have this figure in real estate called net operating income that shows you, how much it brings in before you service the debt. And as long as that NOI is high enough, now that tells the bank how much debt can be serviced. And that's how they manage their risk. They say, what's the net operating income? Oh, okay, well, we'll loan you this much money because we believe you can service that debt in a safe way, and we don't have to foreclose on you and have headaches. So cash flow is so important to have, and to have that increase with inflation. For example, rent is a fabulous cash flow source, because if you have inflation, the rent's going to go up, and the payment will stay the same. And so your cash flow will increase with inflation. And so then when you go to the grocery store, well, the price of the grocery store went up. Well, so did your rent, and so did your dividend, in stocks. So you can't breathe without cash flow. And that interplay between the asset column, the liability column, the income, and the expense is critical. And of course, you look at your bank account, and that's your statement of cash flow, right? How is the cash flow coming from operations? Is the cash flow coming from investment, or is the cash flow coming from borrowing or finance? And that statement of cash flows tells you where that money is coming from or going to, and the direction which it's going in and out of your account. Absolutely critical to learn that basic financial education. Buy the cash flow game. That's the best way to learn that stuff is go buy the cash flow game and play the cash flow game as a family, and you'll start seeing it pretty quick. It changed the way you think about money for sure.
There we go. Fantastic. Well, Andy, we're out of time. I love that last bit of advice. Buy the cash flow game and play it with your family. Like that is such a great piece of advice.
Yeah. Don't fear inflation. Leverage inflation, benefit from inflation. Don't be afraid of it. Inflation makes asset prices go up. So where a dollar goes down, a stock will go up, a real estate investment will go up, a rent will go up, a dividend will go up. Inflation benefits those of us who have assets. It's that simple, not cash.
There we go. All right. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Rich Dad StockCast. Inflation is a silent thief, but you don't have to let it rob your financial future. A huge thank you to Andy Tanner for dropping so much wisdom on us today. If you take nothing else from this episode, remember this: you can't save your way to wealth. You have to outpace inflation by investing wisely. Now, before you go, don't forget to visit stockcastbonus.com. There's free tools and resources for you to help you to stay ahead of the game. Now, if you've got value from today's episode, do me a favor, like, subscribe, share this with a friend, share with someone that needs to hear this. Thanks for tuning in to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm Denney, and we'll see you on the next episode. Stay smart, stay invested, and take control of your financial future.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.